Hey everyone, welcome back to Henri Bergson's Introduction to Metaphysics. This is part three for Philosophy 1301. I am Professor Hill. I'm not a full professor. I'm not an associate professor. I am, in most cases, an instructor. I have a master's, but I don't have a PhD yet. Um, Personally, I feel like I don't have, or I haven't earned the title, but some institutions prefer that you still call me professor. Um, Instructor Hill is also fine. Anyway, or Justin, doesn't matter. So I want us to get through this as quickly as possible. I want to try to limit it to five parts. Um, great. And this is where we left off. They all dovetail into one another. We covered a lot of the big concepts in this already. Um, so that's kind of scaffolded and prefaced for you to be able to actually dig into the meat of the text itself and pick up a lot of details now. And we're still early on in the text, as you can see. So I expect the rest of the videos to be mostly reading the text. I don't want to stop as much anymore. Um, but so far we talked about intuition versus analysis, two ways of knowing a thing. Intuition goes directly into it and attains the absolute. Analysis circles around it indefinitely with lots of translations, notes or sketches, different studies or notes. Bergson basically says that analysis presents lots of notes on life, and you can study other people's notes on life, what it means to live, what the nature of reality is, what the meaning of existence is, what consciousness is, those things, life, quote unquote. Um, all the different experiences people have had basically are evidence in Bergson's view for developing intuition, right? They're notes or sketches, but they're not the whole picture. And to get the whole picture, you can keep accumulating the analyses. And I think they do develop something, but you have to go to um, intuition instead. And so this is the part, just a few paragraphs back, where Bergson says there is at least one reality which we all seize from within by intuition and not by simple analysis. That's the intuition of our own concrete duration, my concrete duration, your concrete duration, the intuition of my intuition. So that means that intuition itself is the thing that I am experiencing in this specific mode of knowing. Um, the intuition is a sort of identity, my identity with truth or spirit or the absolute, right? I am, um, in ancient philosophy, this is called henosis or anyway, it doesn't matter. Not the, um, drawing the comparison to ancient philosophy is not the focus of this video, is what I mean. Most things matter. We sympathize with ourselves, so we can identify what this absolute experience of the interiority of a thing is by the absolute experience of our own interiority. Um, and from there we can do other things, but those other things being augmented, imagine, have empathy, world travel in the terminology of Maria Lugones, um, undertake willingly and consciously and effortfully undertake transformational experiences of world traveling is what Lugones advocates for, with a playful attitude of surrendering one's sense of self to becoming something different. Um, but in that transformation, you should, in the arrival, feel more than what you felt before, and you should find that it's not just yours, or it's not just this body's, or it's not just this intuition of configuration, because it has to expand to everything else, all the rest of matter. Okay. I hope if you need to go back and watch other videos, do that. But I hope this has jarred enough um, of what we've been discussing. Uh, and I'll hit on things more as we go if I feel like I haven't talked about them enough yet. All right. It is, if you like, the unrolling of a spool. For there is no living being who does not feel himself coming little by little to the end of his span, and living consists in growing old. But it is just as much a continual winding, like that of thread into a ball. For our past follows us, becoming larger and larger with the present it picks up on its way, and consciousness means memory. To tell the truth, it is neither a winding nor an unwinding. For these two images evoke the representation of lines or surfaces whose parts are homogeneous to and superposable on one another. Now, no two moments are identical in a conscious being. Take, for example, the simplest feeling, suppose it to be constant, absorb the whole personality in it. The consciousness which will accompany this feeling will not be able to remain identical with itself for two consecutive moments, since the following moment always contains, over and above the preceding one, the memory the latter has left it. So the imprint is still there. A consciousness which had two identical moments would be a consciousness without memory. It would therefore die and be reborn continually. How otherwise can unconsciousness be described? We must therefore evoke a spectrum of 1,000 shades with imperceptible gradations leading from one shade to another. A current of feeling running through the spectrum, becoming tinted with each of these shades in turn, would suffer gradual changes, each of which would announce the following and sum up within itself the preceding ones. There's a sort of open-endedness. I describe this as like instantaneous slope in mathematics. Um, there's an open-endedness on any point that has man, in Plato's Phaedrus, he starts it by saying, where have you come from and where are you going? Something like that, like roughly. But that's not the first thing he says in those exact words, but it's there. Um, and I forget if it's Socrates asking Phaedrus or the other way around. I think I do believe it's Socrates asking Phaedrus, because Phaedrus has just come back from a party and he has a speech hidden in his cloak. Plato's Pharmacy Guys by Derrida. Anyway, the preceding ones. Even then, the successive shades of the spectrum will always remain external to each other. They are juxtaposed. They occupy space. On the contrary, what is pure duration excludes all idea of juxtaposition, reciprocal exteriority, and extension. Instead, let us imagine an infinitely small piece of elastic, contracted, if that were possible, to a mathematical point. Let us draw it out gradually in such a way as to bring out of the point a line which will grow progressively longer. Let us fix our attention not on the line as line, but on the action which traces it. So this associates Bergson with a sort of process action-oriented philosophy. Let us, and that's absolutely true, mobility and process are more real for Bergson than anything else. Let us consider that this action, in spite of its duration, is indivisible if one supposes that it goes on without stopping, that if we intercalate a stop in it, we make two actions of it instead of one, and that each of these actions will then be the indivisible of which we speak. Intercalate means like to interpose or to insert, that it is not the moving act itself which is never indivisible, but the motionless line it lays down beneath it like a track in space. Let us take our mind off the space subtending the movement and concentrate solely on the movement itself. This is weird, this one right here. Just what I'm thinking, right? It is not the moving act itself which is never indivisible, but the motionless line it lays down beneath it like a track in space. I'm not sure why it's not the act itself. Um, yeah, but I think because I think he is getting us to the same place that I get from this. He's still taking us to the movement itself, right? But the movement itself is not the moving act itself. That's significant. Um, pure mobility. Yeah, so I guess this time we shall have a more direct, exact image of our development and duration. Um, our development and duration is tricky because development is a noun or a static thing or a concept is a thing, which signifies a process. Um, and unlike moving, which is a gerund and an ongoing thing, movement is again a thing. Moving is an ongoing process, not an ongoing thing. Sorry, an ongoing event. The movement itself is a sort of ontologizing, which means it makes it a category or makes it into something more than it is. Um, I think it's better to stick to motion, right? Not motion, but I think that once, like it's introductory how he's saying this, but I'm not sure that he picked the right pairing here. I do think you can go through this and eventually take contradictory positions once you've developed your understanding. What you, in the first pass, you might think this makes sense, or you might need it in this way in the first pass, and in later developments, refine it in more particular ways, which is what he does again repeatedly from paragraph to paragraph. He is um, refining what the intuition of concrete duration is for him. Let's keep moving. Let us take our mind off the space of time movement and concentrate solely on the movement itself, on the act of tension or extension, and in short, on pure mobility. This time we shall have a more exact image of our development and duration. And yet that image will still be incomplete, and all comparison, furthermore, will be inadequate, because the unrolling of our duration in certain aspects resembles the unity of a movement which progresses, in others, a multiplicity of states spreading out. And because no metaphor can express one of the two aspects without sacrificing the other. Um, yes. Okay. So everything I was just saying, he just answered. Let's explain what that means. Um, in sticking to the subjectivity of motion and avoiding the objectivity of static things, um, you are in fact prioritizing the unity of the soul and of rationalism and of like first person experience, um, at the expense of the relation between that and the material world that that consciousness necessarily must inhabit. So the consciousness of intuition of concrete duration is not just the unity of the soul. Um, and in fact, the unity of the soul expresses the multiplicity of everything else that it's ever experienced. So this is why we actually, in fact, don't need to restrict ourselves to to act verb-oriented methodology or phrasing. Um, I prefer it, I love it, but I think there's some room to now with this kind of lockstep relationship between process and object. Um, Maybe construct something, some kind of system, some arrangement of processes and things. If I evoke a spectrum of 1,000 shades, I have before me a complete thing, whereas duration is the state of completing itself. If I think of an elastic being stretched, of a spring being wound or unwound, I forget the wealth of coloring characteristic of duration as something lived and see only the simple movement by which consciousness goes from one shade to the other. The inner life is all that at once, variety of qualities, continuity of progress, unity of direction. It cannot be represented by images. Okay. But images can direct a person to intuition and to the inner life. Um, but still less could it, the inner life or intuition of concrete duration, the intuition of oneself, the intuition of one's life and memory of all that, be represented by concepts. So this is the relationship between intuition, image, and concept, which is part of your prompt for your exam. Doubtless, so, but still less could it be represented by concepts, that is, by abstract ideas, whether general or simple. The abstract ideas, remember again, any kind of language like greenness. I have a different cup here now, so I can't use the same example. But I have these greens. They're closer, I guess. It's Burt's Bees. Cucumber mint. I like cucumber stuff. Um, when I call them green, I am specifying the extent to which they are in common. This is much like Plato's forms. Um, the function that this plays is fulfilled by Plato's forms and other philosophers or other interpretations of different philosophers. The point is, Bergson says you're actually explaining what it's not. If it were possible to communicate or to name the specific greenness of this green, I mean, even the same piece of gum has different, like, even I mean, they get pretty uniform, but there are still minuscule differentiations in color expression. Our brain actually just stabilizes it. And that's much of Bergson's point is that we take the halt supposition of the stabilization of the brain, wrangling a chaotic reality into a set of assumptions and boiled down principles. We take that ossification, that objectification, that ontologizing to be reality. We miss the flowiness of it. And intuition can show us the exact greenness. The whole point of this is that if you apply intuition to other things, like to our relation to each other, then I mean, I think that's the first step in getting us on the same page to work together towards fixing issues that we might have with each other, and constructing society in a way that is good for us. I would hope that this is the kind of intuition that can break through a bad person and help them learn to care about others if they don't. Um, cool. So whether general or simple, either one is a reduction of the uniqueness of the thing being categorized and labeled into a concept. Doubtless no image will quite answer to the original feeling I have of the flowing of myself, but neither is it necessary for me to try to express it. This is what I was saying in a few videos ago, where Bergson's like literally like, yo, if you're not getting it, you're not getting it. Um, to him who is not capable of giving himself the intuition of the duration constitutive of his being, nothing will ever give it, neither concepts nor images. In this regard, the philosopher's sole aim should be to start up a certain effort, which the utilitarian or pragmatic or practical or daily biological habits of mind of everyday life tend in most men to discourage. Now, the image has at least the advantage of keeping us in the concrete. No image will replace the intuition of duration, but many different images, taken from quite different orders of things, will be able, through the convergence of their action, to direct the consciousness to the precise point where there is a certain intuition to seize on. By choosing images as dissimilar as possible, any one of them will be prevented from usurping the place of the intuition it is instructed to call forth, since it would then be driven out immediately by its rivals. By seeing that in spite of their differences in aspect, they all demand of our mind the same kind of attention. So you might think of eidetics here, right? That there's a sameness to the perception. Um, there's a clarity and distinctness. But either way, you can carve or start to commit yourself to certain claims. I like commitment as a way of knowing because it's like you do actually just have to own things. We'll talk about Socrates's. I think Socrates best displays commitment. Um, we'll read him next. In Socrates's case, commitment. He had intuitions. He had a divine voice that he called. He called it that, a divine voice, divine sign. That told him when not to do things. So it was negative intuitions, negative dialectics, or negative idetics, what have you. Negative theology. Um, well, I guess negative theology is usually referred to how you describe God, but he practiced that on pretty much everything, right? He practiced the Socratic method. Well, we don't need to get into full on apology. Um, the point is, his internal experience didn't tell him not to commit to taking the penalty of death for, I mean, that's just surface level apology, to taking the penalty of death for doing what he did, practicing philosophy, loving philosophy. Um, it's kind of simplistic, going around annoying people and asking them questions about the nature of the soul and the nature of justice and virtue and how you can know things. So we'll have a day on it. Okay. Same kind of attention, and as it were, the same degree of tension. So again, effort, tension, listening. One will gradually accustom the consciousness to a particular and definitely determined disposition, precisely the one it will have to adopt in order to appear unveiled to itself. What a beautiful phrase. One will gradually accustom the consciousness to a particular and definitely determined disposition, precisely the one it will have to adopt, in order to appear unveiled to itself. But even then, the consciousness must acquiesce in this effort, for we shall have shown it nothing. We shall simply have placed it in the attitude it must take to produce the desired effort and by itself to arrive at the intuition. On the other hand, the disadvantage of two simple concepts is that they are really symbols which take the place of the object they symbolize and which do not demand any effort on our part. Upon close examination, one would see that each of them retains of the object only what is common to that object and to others. Right? This is what I was saying a minute ago. Each of them is seen to express, even more than does the image, a comparison between the object and those objects resembling it. But as the comparison has brought out a resemblance, and as the resemblance is a property of the object, and as a property seems very much as though it were a part of the object possessing it, we are easily persuaded that by juxtaposing concepts to concepts, we shall recompose the whole of the object with its parts, not elements, but parts, and obtain from it, so to speak, an intellectual equivalent. We shall in this way think we are forming a faithful representation of duration by lining up the concepts of unity, multiplicity, continuity, finite or infinite divisibility, etc. This is what I was saying again about ontologizing, right? You can't ontologize concepts and then expect to use the concepts to do anything. They have to be flexible and fuzzy, he says. Um, and also parts versus elements. We're not quite there, I don't think, but we've already started prefacing or priming or scaffolding that concept. We talked about instantaneous slope and how a point on a line or a position of any kind of motion, any kind of line of motion, a single position taken in an instant has an instantaneous slope where it came from and where it's going, where it came from, where it's going, right? Um, if you conceive of the point of the position just as a position, you don't conceive of it as expressing where it came from and where it's going at every instant. Then you're doing analysis, not intuition, and it's a part and not an element. Um, Elements are open-ended with the rest of nature, like I said before, and they express all of that other stuff kind of in a continuous way, but all that other stuff converging in this body. my life and all the environments I've been in, and all, I mean, I've been to Peru, I've been to New York, I've been to Canada, Colombia. I'm from Texas. I've lived in Oklahoma middle school. It's kind of like probably more information than you should know about me. But um, I am an expression of that path and the environments with that path. Um, an expression of the convergences of those environments and worlds in the present up to now. And I will carry that into the future, right? That's the where it's going. I've come from places and I'm going places and it's open and it's, I mean, how would words roll off my tongue and how would the perception roll into the next instant? That's what we're talking about. There's a continuity that opens on to the next. And that's actually a bit of a freedom. Um, and the retrospective to see the causation surging through you is also a freedom to redirect those causations and try to get out of them, if possible, if ever presented with that luck, jarring kind of whoa, awakening, like what am I doing? Do I want to do this? Do I want to do something else? Um, okay. And that still affectively determines, but it's angling towards freedom. That's the compatibilism. Sometimes called soft determinism. So never get the intellectual equivalent, lying at the concepts. So we're talking about parts and elements. Let's keep going. That is precisely the illusion, and that also is the danger. Insofar as abstract ideas can render service to analysis, that is, to a scientific study of the object and its relations with all others, to that very extent are they incapable of replacing intuition. That is to say, the metaphysical investigation of the object and what essentially belongs to it. On the one hand, indeed, these concepts placed end to end will never give us anything more than an artificial recomposition of the object, of which they can symbolize only certain general and, as it were, impersonal aspects. Therefore, it is vain to believe that through them one can grasp a reality when all they present is its shadow. But on the other hand, right, so concepts just present, analysis just presents the shadow or the decaying byproduct or the wake um, on a boat or anything moving through the water, the stream of water that's been split behind and spreads out with ripples, sometimes in very large waves. Um, it's called a wake. So the kind of trailing impact you leave. That's analysis. So taking all of those things out in the world as the final instant. All analysis, all shadows. So you can think about this when we get to Plato too. But on the other hand, alongside the illusion, there is also a very grave danger. For the concept generalizes at the same time that it abstracts. The concept can symbolize a particular property only by making it common to an infinity of things. And in a certain way, this is why Plato needed the form, because the form could not be any of those things. It had to be an infinity that was so vacuous it was another realm. Therefore, it always more or less distorts this property by the extension it gives to it. A property put back into the metaphysical object to which it belongs coincides with the object, at least molds itself on it, adopting the same contours. Extracted from the metaphysical object and represented in a concept, it extends itself indefinitely, surpassing the object since it must henceforth contain it along with others. So it seems appropriate when we put it on the right thing that we already know. Analysis can take us, we already have the intuition, analysis makes sense. But when we take it out of the thing that we actually have the intuition for, the analysis falls dead, falls, doesn't work, doesn't get us anywhere. Since it surpassing the object, since it must henceforth contain it along with others. The various concepts we form of the properties of a thing are so many much larger circles drawn round it, not one of which fits it exactly. And yet, in the thing itself, the properties coincided with it and therefore with each other. We have no alternative then but to resort to some artifice in order to reestablish the coincidence. Coincidence meaning coincidence, right? It coincides. People don't think of a coincidence that way. It's an incident, meaning it happens, incidental or occasion. And it's meaning there are things happening at the same, multiple incidences, multiple occasions. This is very close to an accident in philosophy, and an accident is also a property. So things that are fleeting are often seen as accidents, properties, or coincidences in the history of Western thought, Western philosophy. Going back to Plato, where the form is that immutable, infinite thing. Um, but it's not the absolute for Bergson. Bergson says there's a better, more helpful, useful absolute that's going to get us out of all these problems. We shall take any one of these concepts and with it try to rejoin the others. But the junction will be brought about in a different way depending on the concept we start from. According to whether we start, for example, from unity or from multiplicity, we shall form a different conception of the multiple unity of duration. Everything will depend on the weight we assign to this or that concept, and this weight will always be arbitrary, since the concept extracted from the object has no weight, being nothing more than the shadow of a body. Thus, a multiplicity of different systems will arise, as many systems as there are external viewpoints on the reality one is examining, or as there are larger circles in which to enclose it. So here we get to the needless conflicts between the sciences and between the different schools of thought in philosophy, the different historical traditions of philosophy that find small little tiffing points. Let's call them tiffing points because they have a little tiff and then they say, this is so much different than everything that came before. It's really not. Um, no, I have a respect for difference, and I think that you can get into that. I just think that there is, uh, let's say, at least as much unity as different as multiplicity, at least as much sameness as difference. This will also help us think about eminence, right? How does the one produce the many? How does a plane of connection differentiate into different experiences, different worlds, different matters, different particles? This works well with the Copenhagen interpretation. I believe that's the one that says that wave collapse theory. Can exist in multiple states simultaneously until a measurement forces it into a single definite state. So you perceive it, you observe it, measure it, try to contain it in some way, try to. And when you do that, it behaves for you. You could not measure or contain the non-measurable, non-perceivable, non-containable, the infinite multiplicity, the indeterminacy, the real, the worlds, all the possible worlds that we aren't in right now, but could be in or could move to, the eminence, plane of eminence in Deleuze. Um, so Bergson and Deleuze work well with any interest in quantum mechanics you might have. Whitehead is also, we don't do Whitehead, but and there's more overlap with Dewey too, because Dewey agrees with Whitehead's conception of experience, which externalizes sense and consciousness into matter itself and makes a unity multiplicity of nature, like Spinoza. Um, Dewey says that that idea of reality having experience and prehensions is what Whitehead calls them. He agrees with that. And few philosophers, other than Dewey, he says this. It's rare that Whitehead does this. So, um, yes, primacy of multiplicity, primacy of quantum mechanics. Again, this is the importance of metaphysics. It's not just ethics, it's also the fundamental like theory of everything, how you get the sciences to speak to each other. Um, it's existential, it's scientific, it's ethical. Okay. It's material, it's causal. Yeah, we're right here. The simple concepts therefore not only have the disadvantage of dividing the concrete unity of the object into so many symbolical expressions, they also divide philosophy into distinct schools, each of which reserves its place, chooses its chips, and begins with the others a game that will never end. So that long analytic chain that's missing the point. It doesn't go to intuition. Either metaphysics is only the scheme of ideas, or else, if it is a serious occupation of the mind. So I just had a comment on my video, and I was thinking of this line in particular when I responded. Or else, if it is a serious occupation, so this is just the answer to their question recently. If it is a serious occupation of the mind, it must transcend concepts to arrive at intuition. To be sure, concepts are indispensable to it, for all the other sciences ordinarily work with concepts, and metaphysics cannot get along without the other sciences. But it is strictly itself only when it goes beyond the concept, or at least when it frees itself of the inflexible, so we need flexible concepts, and ready-made concepts, and creates others very different from those we usually handle. I mean, flexible, mobile, almost fluid representations, always ready to mold themselves in the fleeting forms of intuition. I shall come back to this important point a little later. It is enough for us to have shown that our duration can be presented to us directly in an intuition, that it can be suggested indirectly to us by images, but that it cannot, if we give to the word concept its proper meaning, be enclosed in a conceptual representation. Let us, for an instant, try to break it up into parts. We must add, so again, this was the relation between images, concepts, and duration, intuition. Let me sit up. Let us, for an instant, try to break it up into parts. We must add that the terms of these parts, instead of being distinguished like those of any multiplicity, encroach upon one another, that we can no doubt, by an effort of imagination, solidify this duration. So encroach meaning like impinge or dovetail. Solidify this duration once it has passed by, divide it into pieces set side by side, and count all the pieces. But that this operation is achieved on the fixed memory of the duration of the immobile track, the mobility of the duration leaves behind it, not on the duration itself. Let us therefore admit that if there is a multiplicity here, this multiplicity resembles no other. Shall we say then that this duration has unity? Undoubtedly, a continuity of elements prolonged into one another partakes of unity as much as it does of multiplicity. But this moving, changing, colored, and living into unity scarcely resembles the abstract unity, empty and motionless, which the concept of pure unity circumscribes. Are we to conclude from this that duration must be defined by both unity and multiplicity at the same time? But curiously enough, no matter how I manipulate the two concepts, apportion them, combine them in various ways, practice on them the most delicate operations of mental chemistry, I shall never obtain anything which resembles the simple intuition I have of duration. Instead of which, if I place myself back in duration by an effort of intuition, I perceive immediately how it is unity, multiplicity, and many other things besides. These various concepts were therefore just so many external points of view on duration. Neither separated nor reunited have they made us penetrate duration itself. We penetrate it nevertheless, and the only way possible is by an intuition. In this sense, an absolute internal knowledge of the duration of the self by the self is possible. So this is the intuition of concrete duration, very explicitly. An absolute internal knowledge of the duration of the self by the self. It is a perception which furnishes the commitment to its truth. It justifies itself. You cannot resist it. Um, but if metaphysics demands and can obtain here an intuition, science has no less need of an analysis. And it is because of a confusion between the roles of analysis and intuition that the dissensions between schools of thought and the conflicts between systems will arise. Psychology, in fact, like the other sciences, proceeds by analysis. It resolves the self first given to it in the form of a simple intuition, it resolves that, or reduces or resolves into sensations, feelings, images, etc., which is studied separately. It therefore substitutes for the self a series of elements, which are the psychological facts. But these elements, are they parts? That is the whole question. And it is because we have evaded it that we have often stated in insoluble terms the problem of the human personality. It is undeniable that any psychological state, let me just see where if I, how far I want to go before we stop. All right, I think we're around 45 minutes, maybe just 40, but I forgot to check the time when we started, so I'm gonna wrap it here, and we'll just start another video and go right into it. Um, it'll take a minute to process the Zoom. I will probably upload the video and then go back into recording the next one. Um, and we'll jump off from the psychological sketches of elements versus parts. So yeah, I'll mention, and I think, I mean, let's go back up. Oh, I went too far. I'm not used to being this zoomed in. It's massive. I read really small, and I'm just doing this for y'all. Um, okay. So we'll restart from here. That's on page 142 in my copy. I'll say that when we go. But he very quickly talks about the sketch of Notre Dame too, to make the same point. Cool. Thank you guys for being here. Um, got a relaunch to update. But there are no animals in here. So I will just let the last kind of lingering 20 seconds be the cards. They've probably already been on the screen by this point. Um, thanks, guys. I'll see you in just a bit. Bye.